Hello students, welcome to History Class 8, Chapter 8 Women, Caste and Reform. In this session, we will be discussing about changing the lives of women. The major concepts of today's lesson are the problems faced by women in contemporary India, inequality towards women in earlier times, meaning of social change and reformer, communication as carrier of social change, Raja Ram Mohan Roy and Act of Sati, comparing Sati and Johar, concept of widow remarriage, Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar's contribution. After studying today's lesson, you will be able to analyze the issues related to women in current and past times, examine the practices of Sati, Johar and widow remarriage, appreciate the efforts of reformers like Raja Ram Mohan Roy and Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar. Dear students, from the previous chapter we have seen how the British East India Company suppressed the revolt of 1857 and took full control over India. They started ruling our country and started collecting revenue. We learned how the Western education was introduced in our country and how it brought change in our society. In this episode, we will discuss the condition of women in current world and compare it with the condition of women prevailing in colonial India. We will deal with abolition of one such practice called Sati. We will also compare the concepts of Sati and Johar. We will see how the new developments caused change in the social customs and practices for the better society. Today, India is no longer under the rule of British. It is independent and has its own constitution. The constitution offers a set of rights for every citizen. Do you know what is your rights as a child? Try to recall what you have learned in class 6th and 7th social and political life. You as a child have right to education. No matter what religion or caste you belong to, you have rights to equality and freedom. Whether you are a girl or a boy, you have rights to all the facilities in this country. India has fought against all odds to come to this stage. Caste system is abolished, untouchability is no more, and people have been given the rights they deserved. But even after taking so many efforts, we face issues like gender bias and poverty. How did people, especially women, fight for their rights? Recall from class 7th. You have learned about women's movement. Women individually and collectively worked to bring changes in their lives. In the 1980s, women spoke out against dowry, which led to the establishment of dowry laws. They raised awareness about women's rights through public meetings and street plays. The Supreme Court listened to them and made new laws for them. Find out what are the problems faced by women currently. Do they face the same problems as they faced in 1980s? Women today face different problems. They fight for equal job opportunities, salaries and recognition. They fight to eliminate the stereotypes developed towards women from the past times. They also fight against harassment and abuse which takes place around the country. Now ask yourself a question. How was condition of women in the colonial India? How did they raise voice against their struggles? Did they have a constitution? Were there rights? How were their problems different from ones we face today? How did they fight these issues? We will explore answer to this question in this episode. As you may recall, women in the past were considered inferior to men. The issues such as sati and child marriage prevailed. Women had virtually no access to education. They were forced to do domestic work related to home and kitchen. In some parts of the country, it was believed that the educated woman would become a widow soon. The most common practice you might have heard about is the practice of sati. First, let us understand what is sati. Sati was a funeral ritual in which a Hindu widow offered herself on the funeral pyre alongside her husband's body. The practice of sati prevented the married woman the right to live once her husband had died. Can you list out why this practice was against the rights of women? After the death of the husband, the widow was pushed into the funeral pyre by family and society. It was believed that the woman had no existence without a man and thus had no right to live after her husband's death. But there was no such practice for men. If a wife died, a husband was free to marry another woman. Here is a passage as seen from the traveller's eyes, the view of Sati. Observe how the local people forcefully made the widow enter the pyre. This is perhaps one of the most poignant descriptions by Bernier. At Lahore, I saw a most beautiful young widow sacrificed who could not, I think, have been more than 12 years of age. The poor little creature appeared more dead than alive. When she approached the dreadful pit, the agony of her mind cannot be described. She trembled and wept bitterly. But 3 or 4 of the Brahmanas, assisted by an old woman who held her under the arm, forced the unwilling victim toward the fatal spot, seated her on the wood, tied her hands and feet, lest she should run away, and in that situation, the innocent creature was burned alive. I found it difficult to repress my feelings and to prevent their bursting forth into clamorous and unavailing rage. If you saw a woman being forced into the pyre without her will, what would you do? Think about it. Now, let us understand the hardships faced by women due to the practice of sati. Look at these images. What do you interpret from them? The images depict the act of sati. Look at how the people are forcing the women to enter the pyre. These images show us the real picture of this custom. Look at image 3. What do you interpret from them? Half of a face resembles a wife, while other half of it showcases the anger and unhappiness with the practice of sati after her husband's death. Now you have realized why is it necessary to change this custom. Can you now define what is social change? A change that modifies certain thoughts and practices that prevail in the society is called a social change. Ever wondered how this change took place in the society? Who led this battle? What were the challenges faced by them? This happened due to the development in new forms of communication. As you have studied in the previous chapters, books, magazines, leaflets, newspapers, and journals began to be printed and circulated to many people who could afford them, where all forms of social, economic, political, and religious activities were discussed. Think of how improvement in communication would have helped to bring change in the society. Publishing reports in mass media helped ideas to reach more people. The oppressed people were able to now express their difficulties in these platforms. Issues of society were now being discussed and debated, which led to the moments of social change. With the introduction of Western education, many Indians could now explore their capabilities for the betterment of the society. Soon they realized the equality among the masses was utmost important in the freedom struggle. To end these evil practices in the society, the reformers established institutions to reach out the oppressed women. They made attempts to change these practices by advising the British to establish new laws. The spread of knowledge also encouraged reformers like Raja Ram Mohan Roy and Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar to bring out equality and freedom in the society. Let us first understand the term reformer. A reformer is someone who tries to change and improve something such as a law or a social system. The important reformers who changed the lives of women were Raja Ram Mohan Roy and Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar. Raja Ram Mohan Roy was a social, religious and educational reformer of 19th century who fought against several issues like ban on sati, widow remarriage and women's education. Let us explore thoughts of Raja Ram Mohan Roy before we reach his reforms. Roy's parents played a very significant role in shaping his character, which led to many reforms. He was a great scholar of Persian, Sanskrit and English languages and also knew Arabic, Latin and Greek. Look at this chart to get the idea of Roy's reforms. Roy established Brahmo Samaj in Calcutta in 1828 and raised his voice against the sati system. Raja Ram Mohan Roy was keen to spread the knowledge of Western education in the country to bring greater freedom and equality for women. He also fought against child marriage and demanded property rights for women. He tried to show through his writings that the widow burning had no sanction in the ancient texts. Many reformers use this technique to educate the society and bring changes in them. Here is an argument written by Roy against the Sati system. We first tie them down to the pile. Ram Mohan Roy published many pamphlets to spread his ideas. Some of these were written as dialogue between the advocate and critic of a traditional practice. Here is one such dialogue on Sati. Advocate of Sati. Women are by nature of inferior understanding, without resolution, unworthy of trust. Many of them on the death of their husbands become desirous of accompanying them. But to remove every chance of their trying to escape from the blazing fire, in burning them we first tie them down to the pile. Opponent of Sati. When did you ever afford them a fair opportunity of exhibiting their natural capacity? How then can you accuse them of want of understanding? If after instruction in knowledge and wisdom a person cannot comprehend or retain what he has taught him, we may consider him as deficient. But if you do not educate women, how can you see them as inferior? In this passage, we get an idea as to why the society wanted to practice Sati system. The society saw women as inferior to understanding and unworthy to trust. This also justifies the act of Sati. On the other hand, we get to know the efforts of Roy countering the views of the society and how he wanted to see the change in women's lives. Can you imagine the difficulties and challenges faced by Roy while bringing this change? Think about it. Roy was not alone in his battle of Sati. The British too encouraged and supported him in his reforms. You may ask, why did the British support him in his reforms? Wasn't their motive to exploit Indian resources? We discussed in the beginning of this episode that the British had another motive too, that was to educate and civilize Indians. The idea of banning Sati also came under this plan. Hence, the British East India Company, under the rule of the Governor General Lord William Bentinck, supported the ideas of Raja Ram Mohan Roy and helped him in his reforms. Thus, in 1829, the ban on Act of Sati was issued by the British East India Company. William Bentinck also banned the practice of female infanticide and human sacrifice. He brought changes to the education system of India by replacing Persian by English as a standard language. While discussing about Sati, you might have heard another practice prominent in medieval Rajasthan, that is the practice of Johar. Johar did originate from the practice of Sati, but both the terms are not the same. Sati was a forceful act of burning the widow in her husband's funeral pyre, whereas Johar was voluntary mass self-immolation of women. During a war, when a kingdom was defeated by its enemy, all women of the kingdom jumped into the fire in order to save themselves from the evil eyes of the enemy. There was no force by any person or society for the practice of Johar. It was voluntarily chosen by the women. One of the greatest Johar performed in India was by Rani Padmini when Alauddin Khilji attacked the Rajputs of Chittor. That was the difference between Sati and Johar. But the problems did not end with the ban on Sati. Even though the widow was not pushed into the funeral pyre of her husband, her life as a widow was as horrible as the act of Sati. Here is a passage from the book Stri Purush Tulna written by Tarabai Shinde on page 99 of your textbook. What do you observe? Once a woman's husband has died. In her book Stri Purush Tulna, Tarabai Shinde wrote, "Isn't a woman's life as dear to her as yours is to you? It's as if women are meant to be made of something different from men altogether, made from dust, from earth or rock or rusted iron, whereas you and your lives are made from the purest gold." You're asking me what I mean? I mean, once a woman's husband has died, what's in the store for her? The barber comes to shave all the curls and hair off her head, just to cool your eyes. She's shut out from going to weddings, receptions, and other auspicious occasions that married women go to. And why all these restrictions? Because her husband has died. She's unlucky. Ill fate is written on her forehead. Her face is not to be seen. It is a bad omen. Tarabai speaks about the life of the widow. She challenges the customs, saying that widows have right to live the same way as others live. She speaks about the events that happen once a woman becomes a widow. Her head is shaved off, she cannot attend any marriage ceremonies, and she is considered unlucky to the society. Is such a practice correct? Now you also have an idea about how widows were treated in the society. They had no right to remarry too. They now needed a normal life as they led before they became a widow. Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar took the task, making masses realize this reality. He vowed to uplift the status of women and provided the ground for remarriage. Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar was a man of multidimensional personality. He was a great thinker, academician, scholar, and a leading social reformer. It was due to his vast knowledge the title Vidyasagar, meaning the ocean of knowledge, was conferred to him. Upon his request, the suggestion of introducing widow remarriage was accepted by the British officials. In the year 1856, the Hindu Widows Remarriage Act was passed, legalizing the remarriage of Hindu widows in all jurisdictions of India under the East India Company rule. The act was drafted by Governor General Lord Dalhousie and passed by his successor Lord Canning. After this act was passed, the first widow remarriage took place on 7 December 1856 at Calcutta under the supervision of Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar. However, there were some people who were against the practice of widow remarriage. They opposed Vidyasagar and even boycotted him. By the second half of the 19th century, the movement in favor of widow remarriage spread to the other parts of the country. Other local reformers also started to support Vidyasagar in favor of widow remarriage. One of them was Veerasalingam Pantulu. Pantulu was a writer at Madras Presidency in British India. He is also considered the father of Renaissance movement in Telugu region. He formed an association in support of widow remarriage called Rajamandri Social Reform Association. Another reformer, Swami Dayananda Saraswati, who was the founder of Arya Samaj, also supported widow remarriage. Any new change introduced in the society needs time to be adopted and followed by all. The same happened with widow remarriage as well. Even after all these efforts, the ratio of widow remarriage remained low. Women still feared to opt this change. Women who remarried were not easily accepted by the society, and some people still oppose this law. What was the solution to this problem? It was to educate women equally on par with men so that they would become confident enough to make their own decisions and become independent. You will be studying this in next lesson. Dear students, that brings us to the end of this lesson. Let us recall what we have learned. Today, India is governed by its constitution and every citizen of India has a set of rights irrespective of all differences. However, certain weaker sections of the society and women face problems which are different for different generations. Similarly, in the 1880s, Sati was one of the evilest practices where the Hindu widow was pushed into the funeral pyre of her dead husband. This practice had to be abolished and a change had to be brought, which came through Raja Ram Mohan Roy and his reforms. Roy, along with Lord William Bentinck, banned the practice of Sati in 1829. A similar practice of Johar prevailed in medieval Rajasthan, which was different from the practice of Sati. The problems of women continued as widows even after abolition of Sati. Widows were oppressed by evil customs and were treated unlucky. Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar, along with others, launched the movement for widow remarriage. In 1856, the Hindu Widow Remarriage Act was passed under Lord Canning. Let us do. Suppose you see a girl in your locality who is not going to school because her parents want her to work in the house. What would you do to make her parents realize the importance of education? Write it down and submit it to your teacher. Raja Ram Mohan Roy was not the first person to raise voice against the practice of Sati. There were many others who tried to abolish sati in the past. Find out about these individuals and their attempts in banning the practice of sati. Make a table and submit it to your teacher. Dear students, that brings us to the end of this lesson. In the next lesson, you will be studying about the efforts of Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar and many others in introducing women education. You will also study about the act of child marriage and the events that led to its abolition. Thank you.